After 15 years at the Department of Justice analyzing patterns of abuse, documenting violations of human rights, and building cases against war criminals, I needed a change of pace. The constant immersion in humanity at its worst had begun to wear on me. My wife Sarah had accepted a teaching position at a local university, and we decided it was time to prioritize our family, especially our daughter Emma. Emma was born with a rare congenital condition affecting her lower limbs. Despite requiring leg braces to walk, she approached life with infectious enthusiasm that made me marvel. At 8 years old, she had already shown more courage facing everyday challenges than many adults I had encountered in my professional life. We found a house in Maple Creek Estates, a suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes. The promotional materials highlighted community amenities, including a modern playground just 2 blocks from our new home. The neighborhood had an active homeowners association, which we initially viewed as a positive, a sign of community investment and organization. The moving trucks had barely departed when the doorbell rang. A woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair stood on our porch, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as Patricia Winters, HOA president. Her smile did not reach her eyes as they darted past me to catalog our living room visible through the open door. "Just doing a welcome visit," Patricia said, though her tone suggested inspection rather than welcome. "I see you have some unusual modifications to the entryway." She was referring to the small wheelchair ramp we had installed for days when Emma was too tired to navigate steps with her braces. I explained our situation, watching her expression shift from scrutiny to something I recognized from my professional work: the calculated rearrangement of features to display appropriate emotion without feeling it. "Of course, we understand special circumstances," Patricia said, making a note on her clipboard. "But all modifications require prior HOA approval. You will need to submit formal documentation and architectural plans. The board meets monthly to review such requests." That night, Emma could hardly contain her excitement about visiting the playground the next day. As she chattered about swings and slides, Sarah caught my eye across the dinner table. We shared a silent moment of hope that this neighborhood would be the fresh start we had envisioned, that Emma would find friends who saw past her braces. The next morning, we walked Emma to the playground. Several children were already playing while parents congregated on benches. I noticed how conversations paused as we approached, how eyes lingered on Emma's leg braces before quickly darting away. A woman with a toddler offered a tight smile. "You must be the new family on Oakwood Drive." Sarah engaged in conversation while I helped Emma navigate the woodchip path leading to the playground equipment. The surface was uneven, making her progress slow and deliberate. From across the playground, I caught sight of Patricia watching us, her eyes narrowed as she took in Emma's careful movements. When our eyes met, she did not look away or smile, she simply continued her assessment, as if calculating something. Little did I know that this seemingly innocent beginning would soon evolve into a battle that would call upon every investigative skill I had developed in my professional career. The suburban battlefield would prove just as complex as any international conflict zone I had analyzed. Only this time, my daughter stood at the center. The first violation notice arrived 3 days after we had settled in. A pink paper slipped into our mailbox cited unauthorized exterior modifications, referring to the temporary ramp we had installed. The notice directed us to remove the structure within 48 hours or face daily fines. I called the HOA office and explained that the ramp was essential for our daughter. The administrative assistant sounded sympathetic, but insisted I would need to attend the next board meeting to request a variance. The meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later. "But we need the ramp now," I explained. "My daughter cannot reliably navigate the steps every day." "Rules are rules," came the rehearsed response. "Everyone must follow the same process." That weekend, I observed Patricia walking the neighborhood with her clipboard, stopping at various homes. Curious, I later took a walk myself, noting which properties received violation notices and which did not. The pattern was interesting. Homes belonging to board members or their friends showed similar or more significant violations to ours, yet had no pink notices. Sarah suggested we attend the next community barbecue to integrate better with the neighborhood. Emma was enthusiastic, hoping to meet other children her age. At the event, Patricia commanded attention at the center of a group of women who seemed to orbit around her. When she spotted us, she made her way over with a practiced smile. "So glad you could join us," Patricia said, her gaze fixed slightly above our heads. "We were just discussing the upcoming playground renovation fundraiser." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah responded. "What improvements are you planning?" Patricia launched into details about new equipment and aesthetic upgrades. Not once did she mention accessibility improvements. When I brought up the uneven surface that made it difficult for Emma to navigate, Patricia's smile tightened. "We have to consider what benefits the majority," she said dismissively. "Special accommodations are really the responsibility of the families who need them." Emma stood beside me, absorbing every word. I felt her hand slip into mine, squeezing slightly. That evening, she asked a question that broke my heart. "Dad, does Patricia not like me because of my braces?" I assured her that was not the case, but internally, my analyst mind had already begun cataloging behaviors and patterns. 20 years tracking human rights abusers had taught me to recognize when rules were being weaponized against vulnerable populations. The HOA meeting was an exercise in controlled frustration. When our variance request came up on the agenda, Patricia addressed it with clinical detachment. "While we sympathize with your situation," she said, looking at her papers rather than at us, "allowing one exception opens the door to many. Property values depend on neighborhood aesthetics and consistency." I presented documentation from Emma's doctor explaining the necessity of the ramp. The board reluctantly granted a temporary variance with strict conditions. The ramp must be portable, stored inside when not in active use, and painted to match the house exactly. As we left the meeting, I overheard Patricia speaking to another board member. "If we start making exceptions for every special need, this neighborhood will look like a hospital zone." The following weeks brought more notices. Our garbage cans were visible from the street for too long. Our garden hose was not properly stored. The shade of white we used to repaint the ramp was not an approved color. Meanwhile, Emma came home from school increasingly withdrawn. When I asked what was wrong, she reluctantly explained that she had heard from another child that Patricia had told her mother that Emma should not be invited to birthday parties because accommodating her special needs would ruin the fun for normal children. That night I began a document on my computer, a habit from my professional work. The file was titled "Patterns of Discriminatory Enforcement." Something told me I would need this documentation sooner rather than later. Autumn arrived with crisp air and golden leaves carpeting the neighborhood. Emma had settled into her new school, though she still struggled to make friends locally. The playground had become her refuge, a place where she could challenge herself physically without the social pressures of school interaction. That Saturday afternoon was unusually warm for October. Sarah had papers to grade, so Emma and I headed to the playground alone. Several families were already there, children running and climbing while parents chatted on benches. I noticed Patricia had arrived shortly after us, speaking with a maintenance worker about something near the swing sets. Emma made her way carefully along the woodchip path toward the adaptive swing, one of the few pieces of equipment she could use independently. Her leg braces glinted in the sunlight as she moved with determination, her face set in concentration. I watched from a nearby bench, giving her the independence she craved while staying close enough to assist if needed. Patricia finished her conversation with the maintenance worker and turned, looking directly at Emma, who was now just a few feet away. What happened next burned itself into my memory with such clarity that I could later recall every detail with perfect precision. Patricia stepped backward directly into Emma's path. Their bodies made contact, Emma's shoulder against Patricia's hip. But instead of moving aside, Patricia extended her foot slightly behind her, directly into Emma's path of movement. Emma's braces caught on Patricia's heel, and she pitched forward violently. The sound of metal against concrete rang out across the suddenly silent playground. Emma landed hard, her braces scraping along the concrete border that separated the woodchip area from the grass. Blood immediately began seeping from her palms and chin where they had scraped against the rough surface. I was at her side in seconds, but the damage was done. Emma's face registered shock before pain, her eyes wide with confusion as she tried to understand what had happened. A small crowd of parents and children had gathered, watching the scene unfold. Patricia turned. Her expression momentarily startled before settling into something harder. "She should watch where she is going," she announced loudly to the gathering crowd. "The playground is not designed for special needs anyway." The blood roaring in my ears almost drowned out her words. I lifted Emma gently, examining her injuries. Her chin had a deep gash that would likely need stitches. Her hands were scraped raw, and one of her braces was bent at an angle that would render it unusable. "You tripped her," I said, my voice unnaturally calm, the same tone I used when interviewing witnesses to atrocities. "You saw her coming and deliberately tripped her." Patricia's eyes widened slightly before narrowing. "That is ridiculous. The child ran into me and fell. Perhaps if she were properly supervised or not in a place clearly unsuitable for her condition, this would not have happened." Several parents shifted uncomfortably. One mother stepped forward, helping me gather Emma's things. "Is she okay?" she asked quietly. "That looked like a nasty fall." Emma was trying not to cry, but small sobs escaped as the initial shock wore off and pain set in. Blood dripped from her chin onto her favorite yellow shirt, creating a spreading stain. The sight of it triggered something primal in me, a protective rage I had never experienced before. "This was no accident," I stated clearly, looking directly at Patricia. "You saw her coming, you stepped into her path and extended your foot to trip her. That was deliberate." Patricia's face flushed. "How dare you accuse me? I am the president of this HOA. I have done nothing but try to maintain standards in this neighborhood while you people insist on special treatment and exceptions to every rule." A small crowd had gathered now. Most looked uncomfortable, unsure who to believe or how to respond. Patricia straightened her shoulders, aware of her audience. "Perhaps this incident will help you understand that this playground is designed for normally functioning children," she said, her voice carrying across the silent playground. "There are special facilities for children like yours elsewhere." I wrapped Emma's bleeding hands in tissues from my pocket while maintaining eye contact with Patricia. "My name is Michael Reeves. I am a senior analyst at the Department of Justice specializing in war crimes and human rights violations. I have spent 20 years documenting patterns of abuse and building cases against people who believe their power makes them untouchable." Patricia blinked, momentarily thrown by this information. I continued, my voice remaining measured and calm. "What you just did was assault a child with a disability. It was witnessed, and it will be documented. This is not the end of this conversation." I lifted Emma into my arms, feeling her tears soak through my shirt. As I turned to leave, I heard Patricia's dismissive laugh behind me. "Are you threatening me over a little playground accident? Good luck with that." Walking home with my injured daughter, I felt a familiar focus settling over me, the same clarity that had helped me build cases against commanders who ordered villages destroyed, against officials who authorized torture. Patricia had no idea who she had just challenged or what she had just set in motion. The emergency room doctor placed 5 stitches in Emma's chin. Her hands were bandaged, and the orthopedic specialist informed us that her custom brace would need significant repairs. Emma remained quiet throughout the ordeal, her usual resilience dimmed by confusion and hurt. "Why does she hate me, Dad?" she asked as we drove home. The simple question cut deeper than any analytical brief I had ever composed on human cruelty. "She does not hate you, sweetheart," I responded carefully. "Some people fear what they do not understand, and some people abuse power because they can." That night after Emma was asleep, Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table. "What are you going to do?" she asked, knowing me well enough to see the shift in my demeanor. "What I always do," I replied. "Build a case, document patterns, expose the truth." The next morning I converted our dining room into an investigation center. Professional habits die hard, and I approached this personal injustice with the same methodical precision I applied to international crimes. I created a timeline of all interactions with Patricia and the HOA, noting dates, witnesses, and exact statements. I began with the neighbors. The mother who had helped us at the playground, Jennifer Miller, agreed to provide a statement about what she had witnessed. Over coffee at her house, she revealed more than I had anticipated. Patricia has done this before, Jennifer confided, looking nervously out her window. 2 years ago, a family with an autistic son moved in. They lasted 6 months before selling at a loss. Patricia made their life hell constant violations, excluding their son from community events, telling other children not to play with him. Did anyone speak up? I asked. Jennifer looked down. We should have, but Patricia controls everything: pool access, event planning, even which homes get selected for priority snow removal in winter. Crossing her has consequences. By week's end, I had collected 7 statements from neighbors describing similar patterns of behavior. 3 former residents provided written accounts of how they had been driven from the neighborhood after challenging Patricia's authority. Meanwhile, I submitted public records requests for all HOA financial documents from the past 5 years. As a federal employee familiar with records requests, I knew exactly how to phrase my inquiries to ensure compliance. When the documents arrived, I spread them across our dining table and began analyzing financial patterns. The numbers told an interesting story. Major HOA expenditures coincided with renovations to Patricia's property. The playground renovation fund showed significant allocations that never resulted in actual improvements. Most telling was the legal fund, unusually large for a neighborhood this size, with payments to a law firm specializing in settlement agreements. I contacted the county records office to review property transactions. 4 families had sold their homes significantly below market value in the past 3 years. All had children with various disabilities or special needs. All sales occurred after confrontations with the HOA documented in meeting minutes. I created a map of the neighborhood, color-coding houses that had received violation notices. Properties owned by Patricia's known friends remained violation-free despite visible infractions. Homes owned by families who had questioned her authority in meetings showed disproportionate numbers of citations. Sarah watched my work with growing concern. "This is exactly like your cases at the DOJ," she observed one evening. "The same intensity, the same focus." "The scale is different," I acknowledged. "But the fundamental pattern is identical: abuse of power, targeting of vulnerable populations, systematic discrimination disguised as rule enforcement." I installed security cameras at our property boundaries, documenting Patricia's unusual interest in our home, her daily walks past our house, her photographs of our property from the sidewalk. I recorded 3 instances of her directing maintenance workers to focus landscaping efforts away from our section of the neighborhood. The breakthrough came when I discovered that Patricia had previously served as HOA president in 3 other communities. Each tenure ended abruptly, followed by her quick relocation. Through professional contacts, I obtained copies of sealed settlement agreements between Patricia and these previous HOAs, all containing non-disclosure provisions and substantial payments to prevent litigation over discriminatory practices. Emma's brace was repaired, but her spirit remained damaged. She no longer asked to visit the playground. When neighborhood children played outside, she watched from our window but refused to join them. Her teacher called, concerned about her withdrawal at school. Looking at my daughter's diminished joy, I felt a cold determination settle over me. In my professional life, I had built cases that brought powerful abusers to justice. The principles were the same: gather evidence, identify patterns, prepare a comprehensive presentation that left no room for denial. The HOA bylaws required that special meetings could be called if requested by 15% of homeowners. By Friday, I had signatures from 20%. The community center filled quickly on Wednesday evening. Word had spread that this would not be an ordinary HOA meeting. Neighbors exchanged curious glances as they filed in, many surprised to see residents who rarely attended such gatherings. Patricia sat at the center of the board table, shuffling papers with an air of impatience. "We have a rather full agenda tonight," she began once everyone was seated. "I hope we can move through it efficiently." I sat quietly in the middle row, a leather portfolio on my lap containing meticulously organized documentation. Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly. Emma had stayed home with a trusted babysitter. This was not a battle she needed to witness. The meeting proceeded through standard items, landscape contracts, upcoming holiday decorating guidelines, a proposal for speed bumps. When Patricia reached the portion for new business, I raised my hand. "The chair recognizes Michael Reeves," Patricia said with practiced indifference, as if my name were unfamiliar to her. I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. The screen illuminated with a simple title, "Pattern of Discriminatory Practices and Financial Impropriety, Maple Creek, HOA 2020-2025. A murmur ran through the assembled residents. Patricia's posture stiffened. "This is not an approved presentation," she objected. "We need to move on to scheduled items." "This presentation was submitted in writing 10 days ago in accordance with Bylaws Section 4.3, I responded calmly, displaying the receipt email on screen. It was deliberately omitted from the agenda. One of the other board members, a man named Robert who rarely spoke against Patricia, cleared his throat. "I believe we should hear Mr. Reeves out." I began with the playground incident, displaying time-stamped photographs taken by a neighbor who had been photographing their child playing when Emma was tripped. The sequence clearly showed Patricia looking directly at Emma, stepping backward into her path and extending her foot. "This was not an accident," I stated. "This was a deliberate act against a child with a disability who required medical attention as a result." Patricia's face reddened. "Those photos prove nothing. They are taken out of context." "Context is precisely what we will establish tonight," I replied, advancing to the next slide. For the next 20 minutes, I presented evidence with the same methodical precision I used when briefing federal prosecutors. I showed the pattern of selective rule enforcement using a color-coded map of violation notices. I displayed financial records highlighting discrepancies between approved expenditures and actual improvements. The playground accessibility improvements that were budgeted for in 2023, I noted, displaying the relevant financial documents, were never implemented despite being fully funded. The funds were instead redirected to landscaping services that primarily benefited properties on Willow Lane, where, coincidentally, 4 board members, including Ms. Winters, reside. The room had grown utterly silent. Even Patricia's usual supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Most concerning is the pattern of families with disabled members being systematically driven from this community," I continued, displaying a timeline of property sales. 7 families with children who have various disabilities have moved from Maple Creek in the past 3 years, all after experiencing escalating HOA violations and social exclusion. I played audio recordings of conversations with former residents, their voices describing experiences painfully similar to ours. A mother tearfully recounting how her son with Down syndrome had been excluded from the community pool. A father explaining how constant violations had made their home unsellable except at a significant loss. Patricia stood abruptly. "This is slander. I will not sit here and be accused by someone who has lived in this community for less than 6 months." "Perhaps you would prefer to address these," I asked calmly, displaying copies of the settlement agreements from Patricia's previous neighborhoods. 3 separate HOAs have paid substantial settlements to resolve discrimination claims during your leadership. The color drained from Patricia's face. "Those records are sealed. How did you obtain them?" "The agreements are sealed. The fact that they exist is public record," I clarified, as are the subsequent changes to those HOA bylaws specifically addressing accessibility and discrimination. Robert stood up from the board table. "I think we need to take a brief recess to discuss these allegations." "There is more," I continued, unmoved. Financial records indicate that $43,000 allocated for playground renovations coincided with Patricia's kitchen remodel of approximately the same value. The contractor who performed the work on her home also billed the HOA for playground equipment that was never installed. Patricia lunged toward my laptop. "You have no right, this is all fabricated." Two other board members restrained her as neighbors began recording the outburst on their phones. "Everything presented here is documented with primary sources," I stated calmly. "Copies have been provided to county officials, the state attorney general's housing division, and the federal housing authority. I have spent my career building cases against people who abuse power to harm vulnerable populations. The scale may be different, but the patterns are identical." Jennifer Miller stood up from the audience. "My son was playing at the playground that day. I saw Patricia trip that little girl. I was too afraid to say anything because of what she might do to my family. I am not afraid anymore." One by one, other neighbors stood to share their experiences. Violation notices that appeared after they questioned board decisions, children excluded from events, selective enforcement of rules. The board members huddled in whispered conversation. Patricia sat rigid, her expression vacillating between fury and fear. After several minutes, Robert approached the microphone. "In light of these serious allegations, the board will hold an emergency session tomorrow to review all evidence presented," H.E. announced. "Ms. Winters will recuse herself from all HOA functions pending this review." Patricia grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit. "You will be hearing from my attorney," she hissed as she passed my seat. I simply nodded. I would expect nothing less. As the meeting dissolved into clusters of shocked neighbors discussing what they had witnessed, Sarah took my hand. "You built a case just like you would at work," she observed. "Justice works the same way regardless of scale," I replied. "Evidence, patterns, truth." The board's emergency session lasted 4 hours. I provided complete copies of all documentation, organized into categories for easy reference. By unanimous vote, Patricia was removed as HOA president and board member. The treasurer resigned after acknowledging his signature on questionable financial approvals. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. My phone began ringing with calls from residents I had never spoken with, each sharing their own experiences with Patricia's reign. Many expressed shame for their silence, for looking the other way when other families were targeted. 3 days after the meeting, Jennifer Miller organized a neighborhood gathering at her home. Sarah, Emma, and I arrived to find over 30 families in attendance, including several who had recently moved away but returned for the event. "We want you to know how sorry we are," Jennifer said, addressing the group gathered in her living room. "We saw what was happening to your family and to others before you, and we did nothing." An older man stepped forward. "My grandson uses a wheelchair. He stopped visiting us because the playground was not accessible to him. When I raised this at a meeting last year, Patricia said accommodations for one child were not a community priority." The stories continued, small injustices that had accumulated into a culture of exclusion and fear. As painful as these confessions were, they represented the first step toward healing the community. County officials launched an investigation into the financial discrepancies I had uncovered. The preliminary audit confirmed most of my findings. Funds designated for community improvements had been diverted to projects benefiting board members, primarily Patricia. A week after the emergency board meeting, a certified letter arrived from Patricia's attorney threatening litigation for defamation and demanding retraction of all allegations. I responded with a simple letter of my own, attaching additional evidence not presented at the meeting and inviting formal discovery proceedings that would place all documentation in the public record. No further legal communications arrived. The most remarkable transformation occurred among our neighbors. The family whose son had Down syndrome returned for a visit and was surrounded by apologetic neighbors. The mother wept as several families invited her son to upcoming birthday parties and community events. One Saturday morning, a knock at our door revealed Robert, the board member who had called for Patricia's removal, accompanied by a man in a business suit. "This is Alan Chen," Robert introduced. "He is an ADA compliance consultant. The board has approved funds to make our neighborhood fully accessible, starting with the playground. We were hoping Emma might help us understand what would be most helpful for her and other children with mobility challenges." Emma's eyes widened with surprise. Sarah and I watched with pride as our daughter thoughtfully described the difficulties she encountered: uneven surfaces, equipment that required standing, benches too high for children with mobility devices to use independently. The consultant took detailed notes, occasionally showing Emma drawings of different playground configurations and asking her opinion. "You are a very good consultant yourself," he told her with a smile. "These are excellent suggestions." Later that week, a formal apology letter arrived from the HOA board, acknowledging the discrimination Emma had faced and outlining concrete steps being taken to ensure such behavior never occurred again. The letter included an invitation for Emma to cut the ribbon at the playground renovation, unveiling planned for the spring. Most surprising was the community's response to Emma herself. Children who had previously avoided her now invited her to play. Parents organized accessible activities and ensured birthday parties were held in locations she could navigate easily. One evening, Emma sat on her bed sorting through a stack of invitations to playdates and weekend activities. "Dad," she said thoughtfully, "is this what you do at work, help people who are treated unfairly?" I sat beside her, considering how to explain. "In a way, yes. I help make sure people who misuse power to hurt others are held accountable." Emma nodded, understanding more than I had given her credit for. "Like Patricia." "Like Patricia, I agree." "But you did not hurt her back," Emma observed. "You just showed everyone the truth." Her insight struck me profoundly. In my career analyzing humanity at its worst, I had maintained an emotional distance necessary for the work. But watching my daughter grasp the essence of justice, truth over vengeance, filled me with a hope I had not felt in years. The initial playground renovations began within weeks, the uneven woodchip surface replaced with smooth, accessible rubber matting. A contractor specializing in inclusive play spaces developed plans for equipment that children with various abilities could enjoy together. Patricia put her house on the market and moved without saying goodbye to anyone. According to neighbors, she had accepted a position on an HOA board in a community 50 miles away. I made a mental note to send an anonymous package of our neighborhood's new inclusivity guidelines to her new association. 6 months passed quickly. Spring arrived with new growth, both literal and metaphorical, in our neighborhood. The playground renovation was complete, a model of inclusive design with smooth surfaces, accessible equipment, and thoughtful touches like transfer platforms for children who used mobility devices. The grand reopening was scheduled for a Saturday in April. Emma had been practicing her ribbon-cutting speech for weeks, revising it carefully with the seriousness only an 8-year-old can bring to such responsibility. She insisted on wearing her braces visibly rather than covering them with long pants, so other kids can see you do not have to hide differences. The morning of the ceremony, we arrived to find a much larger crowd than expected. Not only had our entire neighborhood turned out, but representatives from surrounding communities and local government officials were present as well. A reporter from the local newspaper interviewed Emma about her input into the playground design. Robert, now serving as HOA president, approached us with an older couple I did not recognize. "This is Richard and Mary Saunders," he introduced. "They were the previous owners of your home. They moved after their granddaughter, who uses a wheelchair, was made to feel unwelcome in the neighborhood." The couple had traveled over 200 miles to attend the ceremony. Mary embraced Emma with tears in her eyes. "We are so proud of what you and your family have accomplished here," she said. As Emma prepared for her speech, I noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd. Patricia stood awkwardly, dressed formally as if attending a business meeting rather than a community celebration. When she saw me notice her, she straightened her shoulders and walked directly toward me. "I did not expect to see you here. I said neutrally, neither welcoming nor dismissive. Patricia looked different, less rigid, somehow smaller. I almost did not come, she admitted, but I needed to. She handed me an envelope with Emma's name written on it. This is for your daughter, an apology and something else I should have offered long ago. Before I could respond, she continued. What you presented at that meeting, the pattern, the evidence, it forced me to see myself as I truly was, not as a protector of community standards, but as, she paused, struggling with the word, a bully. It was the last word I expected from her. In my professional experience, people who systematically abused power rarely achieved such self-awareness. The therapy I have been attending has helped me understand that my behavior came from my own fears and insecurities, Patricia continued. It does not excuse what I did to your daughter or to others. I studied her face, applying the same analytical skills I used when assessing testimony from war crime perpetrators. Her remorse appeared genuine, uncomfortable, raw, and unscripted. Emma is about to give her speech, I said, nodding toward the playground where my daughter was taking her position behind a small podium. You are welcome to stay and listen. Patricia nodded uncertainly. Thank you, I will stand in the back. Emma's speech was brief but powerful. She spoke about how communities become stronger when they include everyone, how differences add value rather than create problems. As she cut the ribbon, cheers erupted from the crowd. Children immediately swarmed the new playground, those with and without disabilities playing together on equipment designed for universal access. Emma joined them, navigating the space with confidence, her braces catching sunlight as she moved. I found Sarah watching from nearby, tears glistening in her eyes. You did this, she said softly. Emma did this, I corrected. She showed a strength I hope I would have had at her age. Looking across the playground at the children playing together, at neighbors who had once been silent, now actively ensuring inclusion, I reflected on the different scales of justice I had pursued in my life. I had helped build cases against commanders responsible for atrocities affecting thousands. Yet watching my daughter laugh as she navigated an accessible playground surrounded by friends, I understood that justice matters just as profoundly at the smallest scale. Patricia had disappeared from the celebration, but had left behind something valuable, proof that accountability can lead to genuine change. The envelope she had given me contained a personal apology to Emma and a donation to establish a scholarship fund for children with disabilities in our community. As a DOJ analyst, I had documented the darkest capabilities of human power. But here, in this transformed community, I witnessed its brightest potential, the capacity to acknowledge wrongs, to change, and to build something better together. Emma waved to me from the top of an accessible climbing structure, her face radiant with joy. This, I realized, was why the work of justice, at any scale, matters, not for vengeance or punishment, but for the creation of spaces where everyone can thrive. It was the most important case I had ever built.